This is Invested in Climate with Jason Rissman. I see climate as the world's biggest, most diverse, most important movement in human history. Millions of people dedicate themselves every day to protecting the planet. This podcast shares conversations with advocates, entrepreneurs, investors, policy experts, and anyone else that can push our thinking about what's possible and what needs to happen to address climate change. If you have ideas for episodes or feedback, get in touch on LinkedIn. If you enjoy the show, please leave a rating on Apple or Spotify. I'm currently building a new venture. It's related to storytelling and how we engage all sorts of folks in meaningful climate action. If you have expertise in this area, big ideas, or examples of something that's really working, get in touch. Thanks for listening and for doing whatever it is you're doing to support climate progress. Okay, let's get started.
There are trillions of dollars of economic value that can be gained by the better use or more active use of both existing and planned Earth observation assets right now. That's not market value. This isn't TAM. This isn't the ability to capture that value. But effectively, the contribution to GDP of Earth observation is tremendous.
Hi, folks. I'll admit that until recently, I knew and thought very little about the potential of Earth observation. It turns out there's a huge opportunity here. A report by the World Economic Forum recently estimated that there's almost $4 trillion of potential economic benefit from making better use of the increasingly affordable opportunity to collect and analyze data about our planet. And the benefit is not just unlocking enormous economic value. Earth observation can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions by more than 2 gigatons annually through tracking forests, managing wetlands, improving agriculture, and much, much more. To learn about this opportunity, I was pleased to sit down with Dan Hammer. Dan's a truly unique entrepreneur who's not only able to maintain a systems view of the opportunities around Earth observation, but who is building a portfolio of organizations to push this ecosystem forward. Between the nonprofit CLAY, the design and development agency ODE, and the Earth observation startup Legend, Dan has his hands full in this quest to use Earth observation to make nature data as ubiquitous and useful as Google Maps. Lots to learn and think about in this episode. Enjoy. Hey, Dan, welcome to Invested in Climate.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Good to see you. Fun fact, in our first video call, you dialed in and I immediately recognized you were at a climbing gym where my family spends a fair amount of time. I was somewhat hoping you'd be there again and offer a first for the podcast, but looks like you are at your home office.
Yeah, the music doesn't lend good background noise. It's not great music, to be honest.
Yeah, fair enough. Good to see you. We have a lot to cover, and I bet a lot to learn. I guess most listeners are not familiar with the power and potential of Earth observation. Before we go too deep, let's learn a bit about you. You have a PhD from Berkeley in environmental economics. You are a Presidential Innovation Fellow with NASA, a Senior Policy Advisor to the Obama administration, Chief Data Scientist at the World Resources Institute. I'm not sure if you're blushing, but I'm going to keep going. You've taught at multiple universities. You founded multiple companies, organizations, and many of these things overlapped chronologically, so you're doing them at the same time. Dan, how exactly do you explain what you do when you meet someone at a party?
Yeah, it's a good question. My wife doesn't really know the answer to that right now, but my one-liner is that I'm a data scientist. And the reason why I can say that is because no one really knows what that means. I don't really know what that means either. And at best, it's a misnomer.
Well, it's a conversation stopper, so you don't have to go deeper.
That's right. My working definition of data science is it's the practice of identifying and communicating patterns from within data. And so there's not much science in it. It's creative technology at best. And I've been working on this stuff for years, ever since around like 2008, when I had started to work on Global Forest Watch, or at least the reboot of identifying deforestation from satellite imagery. And since then have been working in the space of quantifying and then communicating changes to the environment, primarily from Earth observation data. All that wrapped up either in the private, public, or social sector as a data scientist seems to allow us to enjoy the rest of the party.
Very cool. We might have had slightly parallel paths for a brief minute there. Around that time, I was actually working with Google Earth Engine on some of the early iterations of using satellite imagery to detect forestation. So very cool. Hey, you were also the winner of the Pritzker Environmental Genius Award. I've had a lot of smart people on the podcast, but you're the first genius. Tell us about the award.
Gosh, the award, I guess there's about 7 years now, 6 or 7 years. I was the first, and I'm not just saying this to be modest here. I really do think they had a little bit of buyer's remorse. If you think about everyone else who's won after, including like Hindu Ibrahim and just some like real rock stars in the climate and nature, especially advocacy and space, I am a notable outlier here. But it was established by the Pritzker family to help elevate emerging work for those under 40 in the space of climate and nature. It's administered by UCLA, and it's a pretty fantastic community. It's fun to be able to run into the people who are in that community all over the place, including even on this podcast. As I was like reviewing for this podcast, I was going back and listening to old episodes, and some people in that community are on this podcast. So you run into them a lot. It's been pretty productive, at least.
Very cool. Dan, clearly you have a deep commitment to protecting the planet. Where does that come from for you?
Oh, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and in D.C., there is this canoe club, the Washington Canoe Club. If you ever see a picture of Georgetown University from the Virginia side, you see it in the picture, which really annoys Georgetown University, actually. It has like 3 turrets, was built in 1904, and for 4 years, I lived in one of those turrets as the vice commodore of the Washington Canoe Club, and have been paddling since I was 8 years old, all sorts of vessels. So I spent a lot of time outdoors paddling. And I went to college in my father's footsteps. We both went to Swarthmore College, and he's a professor of economics and went to grad school in economics. And I figured I sort of already spoke the language. I'll just do that. My additional flavor was the ability to bring in the rest of my life into something to differentiate myself from my father's. But as a result, even in my freshman year of college, I took environmental economics with Larry Westfall, who is a prominent environmental economist, and just have been doing it ever since. And then when I went to Cal, and in my first year started to realize like I wasn't really the type to be an academic. And when you are in your first year of a PhD program, you realize you're not going to be an academic, most likely. It's a problem. And at the time, in any of those quantitative like sciences, be it physics or math or economics, the out was to become a data scientist. I got a fellowship through the Berkeley Institute for Data Science and still stuck with environment, even when data science, let alone environmental data science, was still a new concept.
Very cool. Hope to go paddling with you sometime. I was actually a member of the kayak club in Chicago when I lived there. And of course, lots of great spaces nearby to go paddle. All right, so let's turn to the work that you're doing. Before we get into the different companies and organizations that you're developing, let's talk about Earth observation. And let's start with the basics. What is Earth observation and how does it work?
So Earth observation is a pretty generic term. I focus on Earth observation from space-based sensors. So these are effectively, and at its core, cameras that are faced down rather than up into space that collect data directly from the Earth's surface. So it's direct Earth observation. And it's not just the bands that you can see, the red, greens, and blues. There's many spectral bands, including like infrared, which helps distinguish trees from not trees, the invisible or hyperspectral, or even bands like synthetic aperture radar, which give you measurements of the Earth's surface that aren't immediately accessible, certainly not to the human eye. But it is a broad and generic term for just the direct collection of Earth observation from remote sources, be it satellites or airplanes or drones or balloons at this point. The amount of Earth observation that's being collected is just wild. And it looks like that hockey stick that we're seeing all over the place these days.
We're talking thousands of satellites, hundreds of thousands of satellites. What sort of scale?
Thousands of satellites. Last time I checked, it was like at around 2,000 Earth observing satellites. There's many more in communications, but I don't even know what it is right now to this day. It's becoming so much easier to launch your own satellites at relatively low cost and insure them at relatively low cost and launch them on SpaceX rockets at this point, that they're just up all the time.
Let's talk about the potential impact of this now more increasingly easy ability, the impact of Earth observation, both in terms of mitigated CO2 as well as economic value. And I know that the World Economic Forum has researched this and their findings are pretty dramatic. Will you sum it up for us and tell us how big of a deal is Earth observation?
Yeah. So I generously listed alongside my co-founder on that report as a contributing author, which is overstating our contribution. And I recently, just yesterday actually, was talking to the author, the primary authors of that report, because I wanted to understand like what were some of the main takeaways and how those main takeaways have held up. I don't know, maybe almost a year since it's been released. And the basic idea is that that report has shown that there are trillions of dollars of economic value that can be gained by the better use or more active use of both existing and planned Earth observation assets right now. That's not market value. This isn't TAM. This isn't the ability to capture that value, but the contribution to, effectively the contribution to GDP of Earth observation is tremendous. And the authors lay out some of the reasons why most of that value is still potential rather than realized. And the primary reason is that it is just too costly and complex to use this relatively esoteric data source. It's pretty easy to use the pixels. These are images, and they're images of a certain place on Earth over time. It's pretty well structured data, but the information that is contained within those pixels is just totally unstructured. The sort of the semantics, the things that we would actually use and operate on is very difficult to extract from Earth observation. And so the authors laid out, they synthesized all of the current use cases. They made some quick assumptions about the path of development and some reasonable assumptions about the pace of innovation, and came up with these just immense numbers for the way in which Earth observation can support various sectors like agriculture. Notably, they left out military and intelligence, which really dominates the market for Earth observation right now, and focused on those areas where there is these dual benefits of Earth observation, both economic value as well as environmental value, the ways in which we can use better information through existing like market mechanisms or government policy to both increase productivity as well as to be a little bit better stewards of nature and climate.
Let's double click. I'm sure listeners just want to get a better understanding of whether it's 3 trillion or 8 trillion or hundreds of billions of dollars of opportunity. What are the use cases driving so much opportunity? Can you give us a sense of some of the ways that Earth observation is being used or could be used?
Yeah. Right now, one of the canonical use cases, and this was cited in the report, is the ability to use Earth observation, which is a consistent, complete through space and globally comparable source of direct Earth information for precision agriculture, and specifically the early indications of crop health or decline in health, as well as other forms of blight, in order to inform more targeted intervention through agricultural inputs. And the idea of catching it early, as well as a more precise application of, let's say, fertilizer, both saves money, increases the value of the crop, as well as mitigates some of the negative externalities associated with agriculture. So it's that 3-part cost minimization, value creation, and environmental or mitigating environmental harm through just better, more precise, and more timely information.
So using satellites to improve farming.
Yeah, that's a big one right now. After military and intelligence, that's a really big use case.
Great. I'd be really curious both for that use case as well as perhaps others that you've been thinking about or working on. Give us a sense of some of the outcomes that we've already started to see, some of the impact from Earth observation.
Yeah, it's hard because rarely is information the very last straw. All that was required was a little bit more information, and people either picked up shovels or put down money or just changed behavior as a result, a direct result of just having a little bit more information. It's a necessary ingredient, but rarely is it sufficient. Does it meet the sufficiency condition to just change it on a whim? We've seen some things like that. Was when I got my start at an organization called the Earth Genome, which I had co-founded with Glenn Lowe and Steve McCormick. Steve had previously run the Nature Conservancy and the Moore Foundation for many years. We primarily worked with journalists. Journalists, they're hungry for information. They have incredible local context and the reason why more information might actually change things on the ground, and are not necessarily the most technical group. And so to have a group of people who are eager to help them extract insight from very large data sets, they were really welcome. And we were able to do that with the support of Wendy Schmidt in particular. So breaking stories about like illegal mining activity in the Amazon or sand mining in China, and even some humanitarian issues that we had worked on, like the Uyghur detention centers in northern China. These were, fed into front page reports, which we would hope can at least move the needle or shed some light on an issue that would ultimately lead to a policy, either domestic or foreign policy change. But it was just one ingredient. It takes a lot more than just information. Actually, one of the reasons why I got into this space in the first place was a Nobel Prize winning economist named Ronald Coase. And he showed that private markets actually do a pretty good job of allocating resources under conditions of externalities like environmental harm if certain conditions exist, like property rights and low enforcement costs, and notably symmetric information. I don't know anything about property rights. I'm not well suited for that. I don't know anything about what it takes to actually stop someone with a chainsaw on the ground. It sounds dangerous to me. I like being in Berkeley behind my computer, which means I can contribute to symmetric information or open information on the environment. Again, it's just one of three things. I mean, actually, it's multiple conditions that are required, but those are three main ones. And symmetric information, open information is one of the ingredients that can move the needle and has been proven and stamped with the stamp of approval from the Nobel Committee to say this is worthy of contributing to, even if you can't directly identify or measure the value of that information in a pretty complex decision-making system.
Dan, you're getting into some other use cases. You're talking a bit about protecting nature through the data. Also, you mentioned things that are more humanitarian. I'm curious about, is Earth observation helpful for renewable energy development? Is it for wetland restoration or supporting fragile ecosystems in some ways? What are some other use cases that you're interested in?
So recently, over the last year, I've moved a little bit away from the vertical use cases, interestingly. And I love to partner and talk to those. Like we were talking to a sustainable forestry operation this morning that uses this information to track certain activities to find what amount to distressed assets to purchase and then convert into sustainable forestry operations. It's really fun to talk to these groups, but especially with the advent of these very large transformer models, as we've seen in like GPT, for example, the way in which we use Earth observation has already changed and is going to change significantly in the next couple years. And so we're focused mainly on that broad infrastructure layer to allow many other people, not just machine learning engineers with an expertise in Earth observation, but those organizations with local experts to be able to more effectively engage with Earth observation, to make just decisions that we just don't even, not on our radar right now, because it's just too expensive. It's too complex to use this modality right now. And all of that's about to change. So we're really focused right now on that broad infrastructure layer to enable all of those vertical use cases. I love to sort of like rattle off the thin bit I know about each one of them. What I'm really excited about is when we have such a deep fluency with the way in which the Earth is changing that it feels not like an exercise in deep learning or Earth observation, but it's just another visit to Google Maps where history or evolution of the landscape is represented, or through time, or that we fill in all those green and blue blobs that represent nature on Google Maps right now, but are basically just homogeneous colors. So I'm really excited for the next phase when you ask about what is this used for? And we're just like, I don't know, everything.
So let's talk about what it takes to get there. And you've been doing a lot of work creating organizations and different technologies to accelerate getting to that path of it being used for everything. Let's talk about clay.
Great. Yeah. So in 2008, I started to work for the Center for Global Development. There was a bunch of economists, David Wheeler, Arvind Subramanian, and Nancy Birdsall, who were asking questions about what the economic drivers of deforestation were. And we just didn't have enough information on the left-hand side variable, or deforestation. And so a couple of us were tasked with collecting that information. And at the time, all that was there were like national reports of inventories. So self-reporting of deforestation that was inconsistent across space. or at least that was all that was public and available for policymakers and economic analysts. So we turned to satellite imagery to start to produce that data set. And ultimately, by 2012, that was part of the World Resources Institute. But between 2008 and 2022, well beyond after I stopped working on that part of Global Forest Watch, I've been working on other derived data sets from Earth observation data, be it to identify plastic waste from satellite imagery or illegal mining from satellite imagery. And the cost to produce those data sets between 2008 and 2022 declined precipitously. It was a continuous decline, but it declined by 10 to 100 times to produce the same data sets, just as the cloud matured and there were better machine learning algorithms that were out of the box and easy to use. That continuous curve, just the floor dropped out from under us in 2022. And that was when I started talking to Bruno, who was the chief scientist at Mapbox and had just completed building and leading the planetary computer at Microsoft. And together with the support of Schmidt Futures and the Grantham Foundation and AWS, we started to train a model, a large Earth observation model out in the open. It's an LEOM, not a LLM, but it's the same basic premise. It's the P and the T of GPT, just trained on satellite imagery rather than on text. That project is called CLAY. It's a fiscally sponsored project out of Radiant Earth. And it exists to this day, where we basically aggregate donated compute, train a model, and release it openly. And it was architected in such a way specifically with climate and nature applications in mind. And there's some subtle differences in the architectures. Rather than to identify tanks and planes, this is to identify mangroves and other things that seem more relevant to me, but maybe that's just a privileged state right now. Anyway, so CLAY continues to exist and we continue to make improvements to it. We'll be able to soon announce some additional partnerships to make it just better and release it openly. Because the fact is that right now, for large Earth observation models, bigger is better as far as we can tell. And so there are economies of scale associated with building these models. And so it just makes sense to aggregate as much compute as we can, release it out there, and see what people are doing with it. And at this stage, we're tracking about 100 applications of environmental organizations that use CLAY, mainly in experimental phases, in order to find, monitor, and measure things on Earth.
Dan, you mentioned that the price of using Earth observation was falling and then the floor fell. Give us a sense in gross terms. What was the price and how much has it fallen and where's it going?
Yeah. All right. So here's a good example. One of the people I hold in the highest regard, his name is Caleb Cruz. He's now chief of staff at Midjourney. And together we were working with a couple others out of the former nonprofit to identify plastic waste from satellite imagery. That's still up, I think. It's Global Plastics Watch. There's a lot of global blank watches these days as a result of this work. And Caleb handcrafted a custom convolutional neural net and retrained it for every country. So what that means is he created a deep learning algorithm to identify plastic waste sites for each country or each region, because plastic waste is stored and used differently. There isn't one idea of what a plastic waste site is globally. So we had to retrain that model for not each individual country, but over and over again. And it was a lot of work. Over the course of a couple years, it was supported by the Mindrew Foundations in excess of, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but 7 figures. It just took a lot. It took a lot to build the data set and then to figure out ways in which to release it in a way that worked well and looked good at the same time. Now, when we go and we try to recreate that data set for just one country, it takes about 2 hours to do with this new technology that allows you to retrieve information from satellite imagery in the same way that people are using information retrievals to retrieve legal citations from a trusted corpus of legal texts using LLMs. It's basically the same idea. And the idea that you can do that through point and click as opposed to code, and having someone as talented and creative as Caleb, there's not many of those people in the world to be able to customize that algorithm. But to be able to do that through point and click interfaces, collect the results, and immediately update a production data set that you would use to allocate investment for different recycling centers, for example, in Indonesia. It certainly made Bruno's head spin and mine too.
Okay, so from 7 figures to virtually free?
It's not a totally fair comparison right now. It's certainly 3 orders of magnitude. That's totally true. in order to do certain tasks. And this isn't all tasks in EO analytics, but for certain targeted tasks where the technology and the infrastructure to deliver it is available, the savings of 1,000 times cheaper, 1,000 times easier. It means there are new classes of applications that we just can't imagine right now.
My understanding is that part of this improved productivity is due to AI. And the Clay website is upfront about the fact that there's been a 5% increase in fossil fuel use attributed to AI. And your site says that we need to counteract this with responsible principles. What are those principles, and how do you think about the growing energy demands of AI?
I don't want to speak for all of Clay because I know that this isn't necessarily represents everyone's opinion at Clay right now. But I'm of the opinion that I don't think that we should, as a group that cares about climate and nature, tie one hand behind our back right now in the use of AI. I think that the abundance of clean energy is better than thinking about the additionality of applications that are meant to mitigate environmental harms, basically. So I'm not saying to be like totally wasteful and to think about clever ways in which to aggregate compute tasks and so that not everyone has to replicate them makes sense. But that to me, I wouldn't want to tie our hand. And maybe I'm just saying this because it's self-serving, right? I love being able to train and tune these models and do so not without paying attention to the footprint because it's real for sure. But to know that the downstream use is not going to sell more shoes, for example, which would further increase the footprint of that information that's derived, but hopefully counteract it in some way. So at this early stage of tuning and training, I just say use it and also push for larger coordinated policy on green energy.
Dan, you also recently founded a company called LGND. Tell us about it and how it relates to Clay.
Yeah. So LGND is now a venture-backed startup that Bruno, myself, and Nat Manning founded. This is all of the tooling, infrastructure, and evals that sit between not just Clay, but all of the large Earth observation models that are being created by multiple hyperscalers and large companies, but to connect those large Earth observation models with end-use applications. It's really hard to use these LEOMs right now. It's hard to build with them if you're an AI engineer or a full stack developer in order to build a website that tracks methane leaks, for example, or illegal deforestation. And so this is that infrastructure that allows you to run inference using the models, any model. It allows you to store the model outputs and serve them up for efficient and effective use in those third-party applications. We went through pre-seed with some pretty amazing early friends and family here, from those that had created products like Google Maps and Mapbox, and as well as hyperscalers with support from AWS, and those coming with senior executives at Google and Salesforce. And now we're going through seed, where we are pretty advanced in that round right now to get investment from 2 to 3 more strategic funds to help build this company into something of note.
Great. So you've got Clay, which is a nonprofit that offers open source data to improve access to Earth observation, particularly for use cases related to nature. And then you've got LGND, which is a for-profit startup. Tell us about LGND's business model and how big of an opportunity you see.
Yeah. Clay is at its core, the main offering is a model. It's a list of model parameters at the end of the day that people can use on Earth observation data. And that is and always will be open source. We don't really see power accruing to models these days. It's a tough spot to be in, and there's new entrants and the floor is lava. And we've seen that investing a lot of VC dollars into the development of models may not be the best use of those dollars. What is the case though? But that's the energy. That's like the engine. And the engine requires a transmission in order to power a car forward. And LGND is the transmission that connects to multiple engines, not just Clay, but like Prithvi, which is the NASA and IBM large Earth observation model. So this is early stage, but the business model is based off of use. At its core, we think that the embedding, which is the result of combining a patch of satellite imagery with one of these large Earth observation models, what comes out the other end is a vector. It's just a list of numbers. And that vector is powerful. It actually works now in order to find and retrieve things from satellite imagery and even used for fine tuning for measurement. And we believe that vector, which we call an embedding or an EO embedding, Earth observation embedding, is the new first order data object in this space. The last time we saw this was in the map tile around 2004. And Google Maps and Mapbox sprung up as the infrastructure to allow developers to create, style, store, and then serve those map tiles to other applications like Uber or OpenTable or Google Maps, which does wild amounts of revenue every year for advertising primarily. In excess of $10 billion is what I've recently heard. And we believe that the geo embedding is the next first order data object. It is of general purpose and powerful enough that it's worthy of building infrastructure, tooling, evals, and algorithms to allow developers to quickly sort through and serve up in their applications to find things like where were the last 3 solar panels developed last month in Southern California, for example, or where were fire roads overgrown in Northern California over the last month. And the basic business model is very similar. It's based off of usage. It's transactions with these databases in order to serve them up to third-party applications.
Thinking ahead to the next year, couple years, what do you need to accomplish? Tell us about your go-to-market strategy and the milestones you're targeting.
We are planning for big adoption here, and it changes based off of sort of the consulting work that this is valuable for right now. So very custom applications is a way in which we can deliver the geo embeddings to customers. But we can't be a shop that just builds various web front ends. We've seen the trap that causes for other organizations that have played in this space where they over-index on a particular application when there's a very large cash windfall from a big contract, either from the agriculture space or the Air Force or some other deep-pocketed organization. And so our go-to-market strategy is to partner with organizations like Ode, which was my previous organization, to actually build those custom front ends for customers, or Deloitte, as they build for government agencies, should that exist in the United States anytime in the near future. But the idea is that they are organizations that have very talented AI engineers and deliver a particular solution, but it's based off of legend infrastructure. So the idea here is to just ensure that we continue to drive down the cost of creating those embeddings, drive down the cost of storing them, and the efficiency and efficacy of serving them up as those custom applications are developed by our go-to-market partners.
You mentioned Ode, so we're not quite done talking about the ecosystem that you've been building around Earth observation and the opportunity. Tell us about Ode and how does it fit into this mix?
I wish it weren't so complicated, but we've found that it's really difficult to operate in the space of nature tech. And there's all sorts of different capital that is required in order to build in this space. Research grants, contracts, product or transactions or just subscriptions. There's lots of different ways, and certainly venture capital. So Clay is an open nonprofit organization that attracts philanthropic and research grants. It's fiscally sponsored by a C3. Legend is the infrastructure. That's actually a product with high upfront capital expenditure that requires the venture capital and the speed and scale that goes with it and expectations that go with it. Ode is about 2 years old now, and it is a tech and design strategy agency for the environment where we help other organizations build, ranging from Google or Carbon Mapper to build environmental applications, custom applications that work well and look really good. So a very strong sense of design to make sure that every year those products from our partners win Webby Awards and Clio Awards and any design award that's possible for these environmental organizations, which didn't happen very often. And that's bootstrapped. It's no investment, and we just operate on contracts to serve a very narrow, quick, and directed purpose alongside another partner. So there's 3 sorts of capital in order to build in this space right now. And I've loved listening to your podcast and others like S2G and Acquired and various other podcasts, and to see that there really isn't a fit for purpose capital stack for climate nature tech. And so we've cobbled together this 3-part ecosystem right now which is starting to actually work and scale. But man, did it take a really long time to be able to figure that out.
Yeah, you mentioned when we first spoke that you see these different organizations really part of an ecosystem that's needed to realize a grand unified vision. I'm curious what it is that you envision being able to accomplish, say, 5 to 10 years from now. What's different in the world based upon the work and the success of these organizations?
When people use Google Maps now, they're not GIS experts. We just use it. It's just part of the way in which we live our life. And it's crazy to think how thin that layer is as a representation of our Earth. It's the best possible representation of human-built structures right now, roads and points of interest. There's a lot more to it that are, like I had said, represented by just blobs right now. Nature is just the in-between space right now. And it doesn't have to be. All the data has been collected and has been collected for the past few decades. It just hasn't been indexed for quick search and access. And so through Clay, Legend, and Ode, and other partners, the idea is that we don't have to context switch in order to feel more fluent about how the Earth is changing, that it just feels like we can access it through ChatGPT or some Airbnb agent as you start to plan your next vacation, or Google Maps. There's just so many. I use Google Maps for things that I'm sure the creators, and I should just ask them, but sure the creators didn't intend to use. It is that sort of easy and accessible, that information. And the idea here is to make Earth information that easy and accessible for as many people as possible through either specific contracts, basic infrastructure, or these new very large AI models.
Dan, particularly for the outcomes that I know that has driven your work for all these years, thinking about protecting the planet, protecting nature, beyond Legend, beyond Clay, beyond Ode, what else is needed to take advantage of this technology?
I don't know. The reason why I'm okay with not knowing right now is when I was at NASA, I was working on the NASA APIs, so developer access to NASA data. And one of the most popular things that I'd ever built was the API on top of the astronomy picture of the day. The astronomy picture of the day is just like two guys at a Marshall Space Flight Center that wrote an HTML page in 1995 and haven't updated it since, of their favorite picture of the night sky at first. And at the time, it was the third most popular .gov website after where's my tax refund and what the weather is today. And it was still just an HTML page. This was in 2014. I built just an API so that other developers could just access the image for whatever. I didn't even know, but just make it easier, much easier in order to build with. In the first month, there were 10 million hits and 10,000 people sent in as they signed up for API keys, like what they were using it for. And it ranged from the background of their Chrome or changing of their desktop or used for an educational app. Wild things that I just would never have imagined just by virtue of lowering the cost and complexity of being able to use that content in whatever that application is. And so it's this one thing that I know that I have this narrow set of skills to just build programmatic access to information and then see what happens. Fortunately, I'm not the CEO of Legend. We have Nat, who is a sharp and seasoned startup executive here to make sure that this remains a good bet for investors. But I am genuinely excited about just making it that much easier and working with those people to figure out ways in which to justify the cost of building that access points, which is expensive.
Fantastic. Dan, thank you so much for your time today. All the best of luck.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Invested in Climate. Please remember to rate us on Apple, Spotify, or Google. Find show notes, sign up for updates, get in touch, and visualize your climate action at investedinclimate.com. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial, accounting, or legal advice. Thanks again.